this is Carrie, Christ-centered counselor and life coach with Promised Coaching. And today I want to talk to you guys about codependency. And you probably hear that term a lot recently, especially in terms of dealing with a narcissistic relationship. And so I want to talk about codependency to clear up some of the misconceptions about codependency, what that looks like, the misconceptions look like in relation to narcissistic relationships. And I also want to talk about the differences between codependency and an empath, because there are differences. Not everybody that ends up in a relationship with a narcissist is a codependent. And even though codependents are also empaths, there are just simply really empathetic, kind-hearted people that they don't have the codependency characteristics that also end up being attracted to narcissistic personality types. And even though they're both empaths, sometimes empaths also end up in relationships with narcissists, not realizing that they are a narcissist and never having experienced something like that before, and now they are for the first time in their life. So there are a lot of cases like that as well, just as there are a lot of cases as a codependent ending up in a relationship with a narcissist. So I want to clear that up, because I think a lot of people expect that somebody that's with a narcissist is also a codependent, and that is just not true. I can personally speak on this because I definitely do have some codependency traits and characteristics myself that have been pointed out to me over the years. But not all codependents have all of them either. And so actually there's a lot of codependents that are perfectly fine and healthy being alone. And then there's also codependents that have a difficult time being alone. And then they're more explained as like the love addicts and things like that, which I'm going to get into more detail on that as well, because there's a lot of myths and mistruths about the love addict theory. And so I want to clear some of those misconceptions up. So one thing that's really important to understand about the narcissistic relationship and about narcissists in general is that their number one driving force is control. And the reason why this is because they are more often than not in control internally. So they have so much chaos going on inside of them, anxiety, confusion, so much inconsistency that they don't have control of mentally and internally with themselves, that they feel the need to be constantly in control externally with everything that's going on around them. And that is a really common trait with a narcissist. And that's why you hear a lot about it's all about power and control with them. That is true in most cases. But they do have some usually trauma-related issues that develop into attachment issues, develop into behavioral patterns, dysfunctional cognitive thinking, and all kinds of other issues, self-medicating, substance abuse, abuse towards others, manipulation, and this is all part of their need to have control and to feel in control. And so with a codependent, this is actually a very attractive trait to them for many reasons. And one of the first reasons is because growing up, there have been learned behaviors that the codependent has developed and become accustomed to in this constant need to feel responsible for what's going on around them. Oftentimes the codependent was the scapegoat in the family growing up, and all of the issues of the family were constantly, or of one person or another, were constantly placed onto the scapegoat. So the scapegoat has been trained, and then they go into adulthood becoming the codependent. That person has been trained to feel responsible for what is going on outside of themselves. So this is a similar trait that like the narcissist has. The narcissist has this constant need to be in control of external sources and people. And the codependent has this constant need to feel responsible for external sources and people around them. So these are two perfect ingredients for these two to come into relationship together, because they have this need to focus externally rather than internally. So another thing that a codependent has been trained to do is constantly question themselves, constantly question their reality, constantly question their identity and really who they are internally, because they've been trained their whole life to do this. They've been gaslit, they've been blamed, they've been expected to carry this load that does not belong to them. And this is something I learned about back in my 20s when I was going through some post-traumatic stress from an abusive situation I was in back then, an abusive relationship then. And so it's really interesting to learn these dynamics. And the most incredible thing about a codependent is that they are so teachable. And that's one thing that I learned, that's one thing I've been told, and even about myself personally, that they catch on quickly, they learn quickly, they self-correct quickly. And why do they self-correct so quickly? Because they've been trained. You need to constantly look at yourself and understand what you're doing. And I mean, you're constantly having to question yourself. So it makes it easier for us to internally reflect. So because we're always in that question mode already and have been trained in along that thought process, it does make it easier for us to learn and correct our behavior and our issues to move towards a healthy mindset and healthier relationships. So let's talk about empaths for a minute, okay? So a lot of times empaths can be in healthy relationships and things just don't work out. They had a healthy upbringing. There was nothing really causing any kind of attraction to this person. So, but let's understand, narcissists are extremely deceptive. They come off in a way that's not true to their actual character in the beginning of a relationship. So they're portraying themselves in this completely alternate or different identity in the beginning of the relationship, and that's not actually true to who they really are. And they will try to mimic what the person that they're interested in is looking for. So if narcissists are studiers, they study everything that's going on around them externally. Codependents do this too. So narcissists are always studying their victims, always trying to figure out, what do I need to do and how do I need to be in order to be in a situation where I can control and manipulate the situation to be in control. And so empaths can end up in relationships like this with narcissists and have no clue that they're a narcissist. And then they find this out later on down the road, like after the engagement or after the marriage or after the baby. And they learn about all of these destructive traits that this person has. And because they're so empathetic, they're constantly feeling the need to enable their behavior, to feel sorry for them, to feel empathetic for them, to have sympathy for them. And so it's this kind of this classic empath behavior where there's this constant enabling going on. And codependents do this as well because they're also empaths. So it's important to understand the differences because, like I said, not everybody that ends up in a narcissistic relationship is a codependent. So let's talk about this new theory with love addiction. Okay, this is really, I think, important to talk about because this is actually an important dynamic in the narcissistic relationship. And the reason why is because the narcissist has this pattern where they are constantly rejecting the victim and then pulling them back in, rejecting and then pulling them back in. So, what happens in this situation is that the person in the relationship with the narcissist is constantly chasing their tail, trying to figure out how to not be rejected. And then when they are rejected, how to get back in that space with the narcissist where they were feeling so overwhelmingly loved and adored and just treated with the utmost respect and adoration by the narcissist, because that's what the narcissist does. The narcissist actually just love bombs their victims all the time back in the honeymoon phase. This is all part of the abuse cycle. So there's the honeymoon phase, and then there's the devaluation phase where they're devaluing the victim, and then they're manipulating the victim to have this dependency on them, hence codependent. Okay, so they're training this victim on how to become dependent on them. The empath is wanting to see the best in this person, is focusing on the positive, is trying to be uplifting, and after the devaluation phase, they are cutting the victim down. They are being verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive to their victim. And then they reject them. And sometimes they discard them. And they can repeat this same process with the same victim again and again and again. And so what happens when it comes to this love addiction phase, they are craving that deep, intense connection with the narcissist because that was what hooked them. I mean, that was what drew them in, was the love bombing. It was making this person feel like they were their whole world, like they were everything that they could have ever asked for, ever dreamt of, ever imagined. They tell their victim that they are everything to them, and they make them feel that way. And that's part of how they get them hooked. And so the victim is then trying so hard to come back into that space with the narcissist because they want that back. And they've developed this dependency and this hopefulness with the narcissist over the course of the relationship to where they know that they can get back there if they just try hard enough, if they just show him more of what he wants or more of what he needs or more of what he's asking for, if they just do this, if they just do that. And the narcissist is constantly putting this on the victim, explaining to them how they're not good enough all the time, explaining to them how they're not understanding this and they're not understanding that, and how they need to do this better and they need to do that better. And it's just this never-ending cycle of the codependent, the empath, just doing everything that they can to keep this person happy. And then it also becomes an addictive process to not just be yearning and trying to get that intimacy and that closeness back with the narcissist, but it also becomes an addictive process to do everything that they can to not get rejected again, to not get devalued again, to not get discarded again. And so it's like you're running on a treadmill nonstop. At this doctor that I truly admire, Dr. Ramani, she talks about narcissism in a lot of her videos. And this is something she specializes in, and something that she talks about is like you feel day in and day out with this person like you're running a marathon. And that's exactly how it feels, because you become exhausted. You become just so physically and emotionally drained trying to keep up, trying to stay on his good side, trying to stay in his good graces, trying to just be in his presence because you love this man. You love this person. You adore this person. You wouldn't be doing this if you didn't. But then he's also made all of these false and fake promises to you about what you mean to him and about your future together. And so you hang on to that and you're hopeful that this is going to pass. And it's not a normal, healthy, sustainable relationship. So sadly, it doesn't pass. It never passes. And the cycle repeats itself over and over again. So this, I believe, when it comes to the love addict, when people are talking about that, and I also believe that there is a discrepancy in codependency issues in this regard too, because the love addict says that, and the way that they describe it, and even a lot of the ways that people describe codependency, is that these types of people, and women in particular, can't be alone. So they're afraid to be alone. They have to constantly be dependent on another person trying to fix them and whatnot. And I don't believe that that is true, because actually a lot of these women, a lot of these victims of narcissistic abuse have been alone for years before getting into a relationship with a narcissist, or have had no issues being alone and not in relationship with someone. They go through extremely long periods of time, and actually after a narcissistic abusive relationship, a lot of these women are just completely frightened to get into another relationship at all, and then they end up staying alone for quite a period of time, if not for the rest of their lives, depending on how long they were in this narcissistic abusive marriage or relationship prior. So I just want to clear the air on that, because that is not the case for everyone. And just like with every narcissist, their history is different. Their patterns of behavior are different. Their past traumas are different. And so you're not going to be able to work with every narcissist the same way. Every narcissist is going to operate differently in their relationships. However, they do have a lot of the same similar behavioral patterns, just like a lot of codependents do and a lot of empaths do. But it's not a one size fits all. Everybody is in different phases of their life as well. You always have to take that into account. Me being in a narcissistic relationship when I was in my 20s was very different for me than being in a narcissistic relationship again when I was in my 30s. Because usually there is a growth process in between there for the narcissist as well, not just the codependent. However, also keep in mind, a codependent is not always a codependent. There are recovered codependents. There are recovered narcissists. If they are able, you're going to see a lot more codependents in recovery than you are going to see narcissists in recovery. You'll see that everywhere. But it's important to understand that everybody has the possibility and hope for recovery, and you never want to take that away from a person in general, no matter what you're defining them as. And it's important to define what's going on with you, because if you can't define what's going on with you, it's like a health problem. Like if you have a blockage in your heart and you can't see it, but then you go in for an ultrasound or you go in for an exam, and then they go, oh, I see this right here, and they can define it and they can put a name to it. Guess what? Now they know how they're going to operate on that. Now they know how they're going to fix that and rectify that and make a change, make a positive change to fix it, to get it in a healthier state. So it's important for us to define these issues, because if we don't, then we can't take control of what is our responsibility and then also understand what's not our responsibility and work on the issues that only we ourselves can work on and work through. So, an exciting thing that I want to share. I feel passionate about connecting this to God's word because God was really speaking to my heart on this. And I want to share, we know this. The word says, God works all things together for good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose, right? And we also need to understand that the enemy works all things together too. But what is he working all things together for? He is working all things together for evil, for bad, for negative. So all of these positive, beautiful traits that these codependents have, despite some of the negative ones that they've learned, all of these things that it has taught them is going to try and be denigrated by the enemy. The enemy is going to try to come in and use that against you. He is going to use it in your relationships, to hurt your relationships, to hurt your marriages, to hurt everything. So that's the enemy's number one goal. His assignment on your life, which he has one, is always going to be for evil. And God, his plans and purpose for your life are always going to be for good. And this is what's important to remember, because there are so many positive traits that codependents have that make them such incredibly strong, resilient, endurant, self-reflective, radically growing, beautiful people. And God wants to use that. God wants to use those characteristics for good. All the trauma that happened to you growing up, everything that was told that was supposed to be your responsibility, that you're caring for this person and that you are caring for that person, and all the expectations that were put on you, God wants to use that for good. He wants to use that in your relationships for it to be serving someone who is healthy, truly does love and adore you and appreciate and accept you and all of these beautiful things that you bring to the table, and the way that you show up in the world, and the way that you are so compassionate and empathetic towards other people and trying to constantly help. And of course you have flaws. Of course you have negative traits that everybody has, what they bring into the relationship based on whatever they've experiences they've been through in their life, and that is totally normal. But when it comes to a narcissist and their abusive, controlling, manipulative behaviors, that is something that cannot be accepted. It's something that cannot be tolerated, and it's something that cannot be enabled. So it's really important to understand that these issues, sad to say, but these issues and the way that you're trying to love this person is actually very harmful to you. And it's actually very harmful to the narcissist as well, whether they see that or not. And unless they can fully own and take responsibility for the destructive behavioral patterns that they have, then you're not going to be able to sustain a healthy relationship with them. And everybody brings stuff to the table, right? Nobody's perfect. You're going to have flaws. He's going to have flaws. But the issue is the abuse, okay? So the abuse cannot be accepted. The abuse cannot be tolerated. And a relationship with a narcissist cannot be worked on together until the narcissist gets help for his destructive behavioral patterns that are harmful, that are abusive, that are dangerous, and until the codependent or the empath gets help for their behaviors that are enabling this, that are making this worse because they're constantly re-exposing themselves and engaging themselves in the cycle of abuse and constantly trying to please, constantly trying to get this person to see what they're doing, constantly having to defend themselves, constantly having to try and get back in the good graces of the narcissist. So that's where we have to learn how to be responsive in a healthy way and not be reactive to somebody that is constantly in this state of rage or this constant state of dysfunction, because that is only going to make things more difficult for us as well. It's going to prolong our healing. It's going to prolong being in a place to where you two can come together and work through the issues. I want you to understand something. You cannot, I know I just shared this, but I want to reiterate it. You cannot work together with a narcissist unless and until he can have some self-awareness and commit to a long-term change process. He has to commit to a long-term change process. It's not short-term. It's not, I'm going to go take a domestic violence class. I'm going to go take an anger management class. It's, I'm committing to getting long-term help to learn healthier behaviors so that way I can be non-destructive to myself and non-destructive to others, and especially the person that he's in the relationship with. So he has to be in that place. He has to be willing and fully committed and owning, taking full responsibility for his issues outside of yours. This is where he has to go internally. And because he's been so fixated on external control, he's been fixated on your issues, he's been fixated on everybody else's issues and blaming everybody and everything else. So this is a pattern that is going to be extremely difficult to disrupt in his mind. But unless that happens, you cannot work together with him. You cannot be in relationship with him until he's able to do that. And there's an amazing center called the Marriage Recovery Center. They have a phenomenal program for men and women in narcissistic relationships, and I highly recommend it. If this is you and you're going through this, I want you to know that there is hope for you. I want you to know that God has a plan and purpose to work all things together for good for you and your big heart and just your empathetic soul and all of the things that you've learned. You are only responsible for this. You're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for what's going on in you and only you, not what's going on in everybody else, not what's going on with the narcissist. And it's not your burden to carry. You don't have to internalize that anymore. You don't have to feel responsible for that anymore and take that on. And I mean, what a perfect dynamic. It's like the narcissist wants to throw all of their stuff onto you, and you're so willing to take it. You're so willing to take it because when you're an empath or when you're codependent, we naturally feel like we should be responsible for helping carry someone's burdens. And actually, God tells us to do that. God tells us to love each other that way. He actually says, carry each other's burdens. And so the narcissist is exploiting that. They're using that, and they're taking advantage, complete advantage of that. And that is not right. It's abusive, and it's not okay. And I also want those of you to know who are struggling right now, because I know a lot of codependents struggle with their identity. And the reason why is because they've always had to question that, because people were always telling them who they were and what was expected of them and the role that they needed to fit in their narrative. So I want to encourage you, and this took me years to figure out, that your identity alone is in God. He created you so uniquely to be the person that you are, and all of these natural things about you that make you up, whether it be the things that you're passionate about, the things that bring you joy in life, that's a part of who you are, and it's important not to reject that. And I'm not talking about like bad things, evil things. I'm talking about things that are good, things that are honoring to God, things that are honoring to you and your identity and your true purpose in Him. And He reveals all of these things to us over time. And that was something that was such a gift for me from Him, was learning what all of those things were. I had always been interested in psychology, and so I decided to become a Christian counselor. I was always interested in helping other people and connecting with other people, working with women, and so God brought me into that place as a counselor. And I've been counseling for 8 years as a Christian counselor and now a life coach. So God has a plan and purpose for your life, and I want you to know that your identity is in Him alone. No one else can tell you who you are. No one else can tell you what you are. No one else can tell you what you love, what you enjoy, what you're passionate about. Those are things that are inherent in you, and they're gifts from God, and they're not to be denied, and they're not to be rejected. They're to be appreciated, to be cherished and honored. And that's how we show honor to God, by using our gifts and using our passions and our talents and these things that are inherently built into us uniquely to bring Him glory and for His purpose, so that we can live the most abundant life possible. So I hope that this is encouraging to you. And if you like my YouTube videos, please hit subscribe. I would love to hear your feedback, so please feel free to leave a comment or ask any questions that you have. And you can also visit me on my website at promisedcoaching.com. God bless.